There is a moment in the lives of men and women when silence becomes louder than words. It is in that very pause, in that refusal to chase, in that withdrawal of energy, that the entire unconscious begins to stir. Carl Jung once observed that the unconscious does not speak in sentences, but in symbols, intentions, in archetypal patterns. And nothing ignites a man's obsession quite like a woman's silence. When she withdraws, she is no longer the mirror he once depended on. She stops feeding his ego, stops validating his self-image, and in that sudden quiet, he feels the collapse of his own reflection. The silence does not merely mean absence. It means the loss of his center. And the unconscious begins to demand answers. Why does she no longer respond? Why is she gone from his orbit? Why is she untouchable, unreachable? This is where obsession begins. Not because of her words, not because of her affection, but because of her retreat into an archetypal space where she becomes mystery itself. In Jungian terms, she withdraws into the Anima image, an internal representation of feminine energy that haunts every man. Her silence does not simply frustrate him. It activates something deeper, something buried in his psyche, something that no rational explanation can soothe. And so, tonight, we will uncover the 7 Jungian truths about why men obsess over silent women. These truths are not shallow tricks of attraction. They are the deep structures of the psyche, the currents beneath human behavior, the very fabric of what draws us and binds us. Once you see them, you will never misunderstand the power of silence again. Truth number 1, silence activates the shadow. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is everything a person represses, denies, or refuses to confront about themselves. For men, much of this shadow energy is tied to weakness, fear, rejection, and vulnerability. When a woman falls silent, she unknowingly holds up a mirror to this shadow. Suddenly, the man must face the parts of himself he tries to hide, the fear of abandonment, the terror of not being enough, the insecurity that he masks with confidence or bravado. Her silence awakens all of these repressed truths, and because they are unconscious, he cannot fully understand why he feels so restless, so compelled, so obsessed. The silence is not simply silence. It is confrontation. It is a projection screen for his darkest fears. And the more he resists acknowledging them, the louder that silence grows. In fact, silence becomes a very echo of his own inadequacy. The more she withdraws, the more his shadow cries out, and in that cry lies the seed of obsession. Truth number 2, silence breaks the ego's control. The male ego thrives on attention, validation, and recognition. It is constantly seeking reinforcement from the external world. When a woman gives her words, her affection, her energy, she is feeding the man's ego structure. But silence is starvation. In Jung's terms, silence cuts off the external fuel source for the ego. Suddenly, the man cannot maintain the illusion of control. His self-concept begins to shake, because the source that once mirrored his worth is gone. This is why silence feels so unbearable. It is a collapse of a carefully maintained mask. The ego, stripped of external support, begins to unravel, and in its unraveling, obsession is born. The man obsesses not only about her, but about the very stability of himself. Who is he if she does not acknowledge him? What does he mean without her reflection? Her silence, therefore, becomes an existential wound. And wounds demand attention. They demand healing. They demand resolution. So he circles her absence like a starving man circling food. He cannot let it go, because his very ego is on the line. Truth number 3, silence awakens the anima. Carl Jung described the anima as the inner feminine within every man. It is not simply an image of women. It is the archetype of the feminine principle in his psyche. When a real woman withdraws, the anima stirs. She is no longer just herself. She becomes an archetype, a symbol, a haunting figure within his unconscious. Her silence makes her otherworldly. She is no longer fully accessible, no longer predictable, no longer ordinary. In his mind, she becomes larger than life, the embodiment of mystery, desire, beauty, and danger. He projects all his longing, all his need, all his incompleteness onto her silence. This is why obsession grows, because her silence is not just silence. It is transformation. She becomes Anima, his inner muse, his tormentor, his unreachable goddess. And the Anima cannot be ignored. She insists on attention. She insists on pursuit. Jung warned that a man who does not integrate his Anima will become consumed by her. She will appear in his dreams, in his fantasies, in his compulsions. This is why the silent woman becomes unforgettable. She does not just live outside him. She lives within him. Truth number 4, silence forces projection. Projection is one of Jung's most powerful insights. Human beings constantly project their unconscious onto others, seeing not who they are, but who they represent within the psyche. When a woman speaks and interacts, she disrupts projection by reminding him of her reality. But when she is silent, projection flourishes. In her silence, he fills the void with his own fantasies, his own fears, his own desires. She becomes a canvas for his projection. One moment, she is cold and cruel. The next, she is divine and untouchable. He cannot stop imagining, because her silence gives him nothing concrete to hold on to. This endless projection feeds obsession. The mind cannot resist filling empty space, and silence is the greatest empty space of all. The less she says, the more he imagines. The more he imagines, the more obsessed he becomes. In Jung's framework, this is dangerous but inevitable. Projection is the soul's way of forcing growth. The obsession is not truly about her. It is about him, about the unintegrated pieces of his psyche that demand recognition. Silence is not emptiness. It is an energy that unsettles a masculine psyche. When a woman retreats into stillness, it is not passivity. It is power concealed in restraint. Jung understood that the anima, the inner feminine of man's psyche, seeks reflection in the external woman. But when she stops speaking, when she stops explaining, the man is confronted with a gap, a void that demands he project onto it. Third truth: silence awakens projection. When a man encounters a silent woman, his unconscious begins to fill in the spaces. Every unspoken word becomes a canvas for his imagination. Jung described projection as the act of placing one's inner material onto another. The man doesn't just wonder what she's thinking. He fears it. He fantasizes about it. He invents entire narratives. Her quiet becomes more powerful than any spoken response, because it forces him to wrestle with his own unacknowledged insecurities. It is not her job to soothe those insecurities. Her silence, in fact, makes them louder inside him. He becomes haunted by the question, what does she know? What does she feel? What has she seen in me? In that haunting, obsession takes root. Fourth truth: silence forces confrontation with shadow. Every man carries what Jung called a shadow, those hidden, repressed aspects of his personality he doesn't want to see. A woman's silence strips away the noise and excuses that usually protect him from himself. Suddenly, he cannot escape the mirror she has become. In her quiet, he hears echoes of his failures, his fears of inadequacy, his hunger for control. That is why silence can feel unbearable to him. It is not indifference, it is revelation. Without saying a word, the silent woman forces a man into his own underworld. An obsession emerges as his attempt to escape it. He chases her, not only for her, but to outrun what she makes him feel. Fifth truth: silence rewires power dynamics. Words are often used as negotiation, as a way of softening conflict or offering reassurance. But silence ends a negotiation. It says, I will not persuade you. I will not chase you. I will not beg you to see my value. And in that moment, the power shifts. Jung wrote that individuation, the journey of becoming whole, requires us to reclaim the part of ourselves we've given away. When a woman goes silent, she reclaims her energy. She refuses to let her voice be currency spent on someone who has not earned it. The man, however, feels the sudden loss of influence. His comfort, his dominance, his validation all falter. He is left scrambling, obsessed with regaining the ground he unknowingly surrendered. This is why silence is never weakness. It is an assertion, a boundary drawn without explanation. It is the paradox of doing nothing yet changing everything. The silent woman no longer plays the game, and the man becomes desperate to bring her back into it. Imagine the emotional storm inside him, a mixture of panic, curiosity, and yearning. He obsesses not only because she withdrew her words, but because she withdrew the part of herself that once stabilized his world. He cannot easily replace that. Her silence lingers in his mind longer than her presence ever did. And now we arrive at the final truths, the most profound revelations that Jung's psychology offers us about why silence, when embodied by a woman, becomes more than a quiet withdrawal. It becomes a living symbol that reshapes the very psychic world of the man who encounters it. Truth 5. Silence awakens the archetype of the unknown. Every man is driven, often unconsciously, by a hunger for mystery. The familiar comforts him, but it does not ignite his imagination. Jung taught us that the psyche is drawn compulsively toward what it does not fully know, and nothing embodies that unknown more powerfully than a woman who chooses silence. Her refusal to explain, to justify, to over-communicate leaves an empty space. That space becomes an opening through which her projections rush in. She is no longer just herself. in his mind. She becomes the oracle, the riddle, the figure he cannot decode. He obsesses not because she gives him answers, but because she gives him silence. Silence demands he wrestle with his own inner narratives, his own fears and longings. In her quiet presence, he does not hear her, he hears himself. And that, paradoxically, makes her unforgettable. Truth 6. Silence disarms his ego. The male ego thrives on reaction. It thrives when its words provoke an immediate defense, an argument, or a plea. But silence offers none of that. Silence is not passive. It is deeply active. It withholds the very fuel his ego feeds upon. When a woman stops explaining, she stops supplying, she steps back, and suddenly his grand gestures, his provocations, his attempt to control are met with nothing. And in that nothingness, he feels the weight of his own actions without the buffer of her response. Silence strips away the illusion that he is in control. It forces him to confront the possibility that he never was. This is why men obsess over a silent woman. Because she removes the illusion, and in its place, she forces him into confrontation with himself. The ego hates this, but the soul craves it. And so he keeps returning, unable to stay away, desperate to fill the gap that silence has exposed. Truth 7. Silence awakens his anima. This is the most Jungian truth of all. Jung believed that within every man lies the anima, the inner feminine, the psychic image of woman that lives in his unconscious. Most men spend their lives projecting this anima outward onto the women they love, the women they desire, and the women they cannot have. But when a woman becomes silent, something extraordinary happens. Her silence forces him inward. He cannot grasp her, cannot control her, cannot fully know her. And so his psyche turns inward toward his anima. He begins to wrestle with the feminine within himself. The tenderness he resists, the vulnerability he hides, the longing he buries. And because this process is painful, because it disrupts his entire sense of self, he cannot stop thinking about her. She has become the catalyst for his inner journey, whether he realizes it or not. That is why silence has such a magnetic pull. It is not simply about withholding words. It is about awakening forces in him that are far older, far deeper than logic or reason. It is about awakening his unconscious. So, let us gather these truths. Silence is not emptiness. It is a force. It is an archetype. It is the doorway into his unconscious, into the mysteries that compel him and the truths that haunt him. When a woman stops speaking, she does not lose her power. She embodies it. Her silence becomes a mirror of his shadow, the test of his ego, the doorway to his anima, and the mystery he cannot escape. This is why men obsess over silent women. Not because of weakness, not because of fear, but because silence is the one thing he cannot conquer. He can conquer words. He can conquer logic, but silence leaves him face to face with himself. And there is no greater obsession than the one that forces a man to confront his own depths. Remember this. Silence is not a retreat. It is an arrival into your strength, into your mystery, into the timeless truth that Jung uncovered. The truth that obsession is born not for what you give, but from what you withhold. And as he obsesses, as he circles around your silence, know this. The power is not his. The power is yours.